Combat Thoughts. I'm Robbie.
I'm Lee.
And I'm Alex.
We're going to take a deeper look at culture and philosophy behind martial arts.
Yeah, so what I thought, I like your podcast. It seems like a similar style to us. What I thought would be cool would just get you on. Maybe it makes more sense to start with like your martial arts background a little bit, because that's normally what we do. Then I was interested to see why you started up the podcast and kind of your opinion on MMA and martial arts media at the moment, where you think you fit in.
Jesus, okay. Okay, so my martial arts career started when I couldn't even tell you, young, right? Young. Like maybe 10, something like that. 9 or 10, something like that. Anyway, I was young. And a kid that I went to school with, he was my friend. His uncle was a karate instructor, and we just went along. He was already training there. We went along, and it was very much like, I guess it was kind of traditional karate in a sense, where you line up in your belt order and you do a set specific movement for an hour, and then you don't spar, and there's no it's not real training, right? Not really.
Yeah.
And then the federation that guy was coaching under was taken over by, so I was coaching under ECKA at the time, which is English Contact Karate Association or something like that, right? And then it was taken over by something called BMKA, which was like British Modern Karate Association, which was essentially exactly the same fucking thing, but just some other guys at the top of it. And that was a little bit more kickboxing focused. That was a little bit more contact focused. And that's when I began to really compete properly and actually spar and all those sorts of stuff. And then I had a couple of fights as a kid, not full. Well, I had a couple of full contact fights, but specifically when in the federation I was under, when you're under 16, you weren't allowed to do what was called continuous or full contact, meaning you'd score a point and then the referee would stop you and then you had to continue again. When I turned 16, I was able to compete. I think I actually competed full contact first at 15, but whatever. And that was sorry.
But like keeping it quiet, you're too young.
Yeah, exactly. And that was just three rounds. We wore headgear and shin pads and those kinds of things, but it was essentially full contact. And then I picked up an injury at like 16-ish. And my mother said to me, are you going to do this full time? Like, is this going to be your career, or are you going to not do it? And I basically said, look, I'm not good enough to make this my career. So no is the answer. So she said, okay, then I was training, 3 to 5 times a week at this point. And she said, look, I want you to focus on your GCSEs. So either stop training or dial down your training. And bearing in mind, I had an injury. I'd broken my jaw and I'd broken a rib. So I'd fractured my jaw. It wasn't hanging off or anything, but yeah. And I kind of said, well, look, I can't really train with a broken rib and a fractured jaw, so I'll just stay off it. And then GCSEs took over, and I just never went back, right? Like, life just changed and whatever. And then I moved down to London, and I'd been following MMA for quite a while by the time I'd moved to London. And when I got to London, I just decided, oh, fuck it, I'll jump in the ring again and see what happens. And from jumping in the ring, I realized I didn't want to get hit in the head anymore. But I turned up at London Shoot Fighters. You guys know London Shoot Fighters?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, London Shoot Fighters is one of the most prominent MMA gyms in London. It's actually split into 2 gyms. One is in West London where the pros train, and then there's one in the east of London, which is kind of where more amateur guys train, and it's just sort of it's a bit more like a run-of-the-mill MMA gym. You find some scrubs there, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Whereas if you go to West, that's where the pros are and it's serious training. And I turned up at East because it was closer to where I lived. And I did some MMA classes, I did some kickboxing classes, I did some boxing classes, and I just realized that I didn't want to get hit in the head anymore. But I started doing Ju-Jitsu and I fell in love with it. I absolutely fell in love with it. So I don't strike at all anymore, really. I jumped in and I did 10 rounds of sparring a couple of Saturdays ago when we were out of lockdown. But that was the first time I'd thrown anything with intent in 6 years. Like I taught some classes at Shoot Fighters, some kickboxing classes. I taught some, but not again. Like I didn't spar with intent, right? I was only ever playing, right? And But yeah, those 10 rounds of sparring reminded me all the good and bad things about combat sports. That's for sure. It's like, it's wonderful to catch someone with a head kick, but it's awful to get caught with one. Right? Awful.
Yes.
So that's really my combat sports career. I mean, I've competed a couple of times in jiu-jitsu, nowhere near as much as I'd like to. Various things have kept me away from doing that, but hopefully when we're back to full training, I can jump back into competition.
So you're still training. So you were training jiu-jitsu at Shoot Fighters?
Yeah. So that's where I started jiu-jitsu. Yeah. So I've only ever trained jiu-jitsu at Shoot Fighters. I mean, I've been to other gyms, but not that. That's where I train. That's where I go. That's where you'll find me 5 times a week.
Nice. Makes sense about the not wanting to get hit in the head. I feel like there's something about when people get past about 20, 22, they're just like they're done with it.
Yeah, unless you're still, you're pursuing it in terms of competition and whatever, and gets more professionally, obviously, than you would. But yeah, I think we're on the same page, really. Well, Robbie's a bit weird, where he still kind of likes it, don't you? You still kind of like it, just a little bit.
Just a little.
Don't blame me.
You still are.
I'll go back when I can. I mean, it's been a long time since I've thrown a punch, but I'll give it a shot a few more times. Alex, you've pretty much given up on Muay Thai now, haven't you? Oh wait, no.
Well, I mean, yeah. Before lockdown, I was training only jiu-jitsu as well. Like you, Harry, I wasn't training Muay Thai at all. I was training Muay Thai since basically 15, and although I didn't compete in karate as like a sparring type situation or contact, I did actually that was my first martial art, was karate as well, and I did like kata and all that shit.
Yeah, of course.
And I got like a bunch of medals, which don't really fucking mean anything.
Sure.
But I guess it was good fun. Anyway, I then started Muay Thai because I always wanted, actually, from when I remember, like when I was 8 years old, I was like, fuck, I really want to do Thai boxing, but my dad wouldn't let me.
Don't blame him
and
either.
he wouldn't. Only when I got to probably I did boxing when I was fairly young for like a year, but then we moved somewhere, and then life got in the way. Like same with Thai boxing. I had A levels and I took them pretty seriously, so I kind of didn't really train as much for Thai boxing. And where I lived, which was Swindon, near Swindon, there wasn't like an incredible gym to go to. So when I wanted to get really good training, I would get my dad to drive me to Oxford, which was like, almost an hour drive each way. So yeah.
It's funny though.
So now
we all go from like being that committed to striking before. The number of people who grow up and go to jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
Everyone I know from the old Muay Thai club, they all do jiu-jitsu now.
It's something that gives you,
it's legit, but it doesn't get you hurt like in the same way.
The same way.
Yeah, in the same way. I mean, I've had a plethora of injuries from jiu-jitsu, but very few of them have been concussive injuries, right? Like, there's definitely, I think in a sense, jiu-jitsu is a little bit more cerebral. And the reason why I say that is because we've all been there where you're doing a round and the round is with someone that's about 25 kilos heavier than you. They're more athletic than you are, and they're stronger than you are. Unless you're Senchai or, Georgie Kakarian or someone like that, it's going to be tough for you to footwork your way out of that, right? You're probably getting blasted a few times, whether you like it or not. And jiu-jitsu is like that in a way, right? Like, don't get me wrong, if somebody wants to smash past your guard and they're 25 kilos heavier than you and they're also super athletic and whatever, that's fine. But again, you're not left with a mild concussion at the end of it,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, if I'm going to, if my cartilage is going to be a bit messed up when I'm older, that's one thing. But I want to be able to do a crossword and tie my shoelaces.
Yeah.
It's about what you're willing to risk, I think.
Yeah, and I think, that's MMA in a nutshell, right? It's what you're willing to risk.
Yeah. Yeah. So even though I like the striking a bit, I might do a couple more fights, but I know that it's sort of a light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing.
Yeah, the guy that teaches the Muay Thai class at my place always asks me if I want to do an interclub, and I'm like, yeah, but I can't win. Like the interclub, there's no winner, right? It's just a draw, and you're not allowed to knock people out as well. So it's like when I mean knock them out, I mean you can't TKO them, and you can't,
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I just don't like the idea of that. Like I don't see the point in fighting if you can't win or can't lose, right?
Yeah, I get your point. I mean you could still, if you want experience of something that really replicates a fight, because I think even an interclub you can still get in the mindset especially if it's one of your first one. Maybe I would see that as a point, but like I guess once you've gone through those motions and then you just kind of you've had some of these interclubs and then I see your point. Yeah, then you like for me now I wouldn't do an interclub even though I haven't had like a huge amount of them, but I've trained for a long time, and the only fight that would make me excited that I would want to do is doing at least one like C or B class type Thai boxing fight.
Interesting.
Just once, but that would be it.
I think an interclub is a bike with training wheels. It's fine to get used to. It's good as a precursor to doing an actual fight, but it's not the real thing.
Yeah, and I think, I fought at 15, essentially, right? Like I get it, but I feel like if I was going to do it, like I don't care if I get paid or anything, whatever, I don't mind. But if I'm going to fight, the fun in the fight is the reason why it's nerve-wracking is because you can lose, right? Obviously there's the damage and everything else, but you don't want to lose. You don't want to lose horrifically. You don't want to like if you're an interclub and somebody's pulling their punches or somebody's pulling their kicks, what's the point? Like, what's the point?
Like my thing is, you know what? I'd be afraid of going out into a cage and getting flying kneed in the first 10 seconds. But the reason I'd be afraid is not because of the brain damage. It's because I don't even know if it's the embarrassment. It's just the loss, some sort of weird intangible thing. That's what worries me. And yeah, if you can't go out and do your best, I get what you mean. Like if you can't win.
Yeah. It's like if you were going out for an exam that you already knew the result of, or you couldn't pass it, right? You'd already passed your A level, and you were just doing this tertiary exam that was just there as a module that you didn't even pass. Like you just not bother. But anyway, that's my ramble on Interclub Muay Thai.
All right, we'll move on from that. Well, yeah, I mean, the other important bit we kind of want to talk about is the podcast. I mean, where'd the inspiration come from? How come you got involved in MMA media at all?
Sure. So, I mean, I should probably specify that there's two arms to the podcast, right? Mm-hmm. The primary arm of the podcast is absolutely nothing to do with MMA whatsoever. So the podcast is called All About Balance, and essentially it's literally just a platform derived for conversation, right? Interesting conversation. And that was the motivation. The motivation was I enjoy conversation with anyone, essentially. As long as it's somewhat cerebral and somewhat intelligent, then that's cool for me. I'm happy to engage, and I felt that there's something that's entirely lacking predominantly in males, right? Especially like males our age, but is conversation, like in-depth conversation about anything. It could be about politics, it could be about religion, it could be about emotions, it could be about fights, it could be about anything, right? Anything of value. I felt that was missing, and I also feel that in an age of social media, in an age of text-based conversation, the art of conversation is something that's dwindling, and I felt like I wanted to put a stake in the ground somewhere, even though it is technical, right? A technical stake in the ground, and say that I still feel that conversation has a place. So that's the first arm of the podcast. Now the second arm is the MMA breakdowns that we do. So that's called The Balance Breakdown, and I'm joined by two absolutely wonderful gentlemen named Sean and Jack. Both of them excellent Jiu-Jitsu players. Jack's been an MMA coach. Sean is an MMA coach. So, these guys are really, really, really phenomenal. I'm really, really grateful for those guys doing the podcast with me. But why? Why the motivation? I just enjoy it, mate. Like, I just enjoy fights. I study fights. I watch them both as a fan and as an analyst. I watch them as a referee. I watch them as a judge. Not that I've done either of those things, but I watch fights for enjoyment, right? For a plethora of different things. And one thing that frustrates me, and we'll probably get onto this, is when people are watching fights but they don't know what they're watching, right?
Yeah,
so
sure.
I feel like there's something that if I feel like I have an opinion that's valid, right, then I want to share that opinion, and I want people to be able to take that opinion and do what they want with it, right? Either discard it or learn from it or argue with me or whatever it is. And the point of the Balance Breakdown podcast is essentially just to break down some fights with my friends, have a laugh, slag some fighters, slag each other, and hopefully come with something that's both entertaining and informative at the same time. Now, I also do, this is nothing to do with the podcast, but do you guys know Attack the Back, the website?
Yes.
Attack the Back?
Yes.
Yeah, so I write for Attack the Back.
Oh, really?
I write a long form breakdown for every pay-per-view card, sorry. So I've been doing that for about 4 or 5 pay-per-views now. The owner of Attack the Back, shout out to Richard, is an absolute pioneer in jiu-jitsu photography, combat sports photography, and the Attack the Back website is not just jiu-jitsu, it's sort of combat sports in general. And he asked me, do you want to do some writing for me? And I was like, yeah, grand. He was like, what do you want to do? And I said, I like writing long form. So I write some long form articles. They're all about 3,000 words, something like that. And the goal of that is a different sort of passion I have, and that is the thing that frustrates me is people watch fights and, like, let's take Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno, right? So an incredible fight, right? Like an absolutely incredible fight. It brings a smile to my face just thinking about it. But whoever loses that fight, there's going to be some person watching that fight that's like, oh, fighter X is shit. Doesn't know what he's doing. Like, why did he do that? Why didn't he just do this? Why did he... Shut the fuck up. Like, the point of the Balance Breakdown or the Attack the Breakdown stuff is, what I'm trying to do is portray that these people are real people, right? And try to break down what it is that they're doing, what it is they're attempting to do, and how they're attempting to do it. Now, Brandon Moreno may go in and lose on Saturday. Deiveson Figueiredo may lose on Saturday. But it's an attempt to try and show these people in a different light and to try to tell their story a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting you even need to do that, because
sure.
I think it's different between... I'd say there's a big difference between jiu-jitsu and MMA and the audiences that watch it.
100%.
Because you go to a jiu-jitsu show and you kind of know that there are going to be like maybe 1% of people who don't know what's going on.
Sure.
But everyone there is informed. Mm-hmm. And apart from people really just trolling, you never hear like, oh, so-and-so shit because he lost to Gordon Ryan.
100%.
Go to a bar, watch an MMA fight.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I mean, all of that.
Yeah, like if you took, let's think one of the biggest mismatches is like Valentina Shevchenko fighting, frankly, anyone outside of Amanda Nunes. Like if you look at Jennifer Maia versus Valentina Shevchenko, everyone in the MMA sphere that has been watching MMA for a little while is like, oh my God, Valentina Shevchenko lost a round. Like, that's insane. And then you'll see the guy next to you in the bar or whatever and be like, oh, what are they on the floor for? Like, that's shit. Like, they're both shit. Yeah. Valentina takes down Jennifer Maia dominantly, the jiu-jitsu black belt, the world's winner. And they're like, oh, they're on the floor. Like, they're both shit. Like, I'm like, oh, Jesus. Like, honestly, it rustles me in a very, very particular way.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a shame because it just undermines the effort that these people go through to get to the level they're at.
Yes, sir.
That's where it tickles me most, I would say.
I think it's something about the audience that MMA is marketed for, and it's the fact that it's MMA at all, because you don't get the same with like football. People understand.
You do.
You do? Okay.
Oh, 100%. So I used to be a season ticket holder for Manchester United, right?
Okay.
So I would go to every game, not away games because that wasn't what the season ticket qualified for. But do you guys follow football at all?
I don't.
I
I
used
shouldn't
to,
have mentioned
not
football because I
anymore.
know nothing about it.
Fine.
So it's a can of worms.
So I'll keep it brief. Basically, at every ground there is a stand or an end that holds the diehard supporters, right?
Yeah.
So the stand for Manchester United is called the Stretford End. So I was fortunate enough to have a season ticket in the Stretford End next to one of my family members, and these are the people that have been following Manchester United their entire lives, right? Now, if you think the comparison I'll make is anyone that's in the top 15 of the UFC, if me or you or Alex had a spar with them, it's not close in any way, shape, or form, right? Any Premier League footballer played a game with us, it'd look the same.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And you see the level of vitriol passed to these players about their ability to a guy that's 35 stone that probably couldn't even see a football below him if somebody passed it to him, right, is unruly. I think that what it is, the same thing that you get in football, the same thing you get in MMA, is these things are embedded in our culture. MMA is fighting, right? It's gladiators, essentially. That's what you're marketing it as. It's gladiator versus gladiator.
Yeah.
Well, football has been in our culture, in the mainstream culture, at least in Europe and whatever, for as long as we can remember. And because people have had it entrenched in their culture for so long, they just decide they can have an opinion on it.
Right.
That's my opinion anyway. That's how I feel it is.
That might be the case. I mean, I had my own theory with regards to fighting. Have you ever spoken to someone and they've just got this unbelievable, naive confidence that with 0 hours training, they would be able to fight someone? There's a very well-known quote from Joe Rogan, just like, you see a guy, he might be mildly athletic, and then he's a Muay Thai champion, and people get into altercations without having any idea what they're doing. It's a bizarre confidence in society that they're like, I could fight. No evidence, nothing to back it up. Maybe they've lifted some weights and they punched a punch bag once. And so when people see fighters, they immediately think that what they're doing is easy. But if you were to compare it to, fine, football's not a good example, apparently. I should have picked something else. If you watch... If someone had been playing chess for 10 years, doesn't matter how smart you are, if you've not played chess, you're not going to expect to... Well, not even win. You're not even going to expect to be competitive. And yet with fighting, for some reason, that goes out the window. People see fighting as like a skill that's not like others. So people see fighting as just a skill you can just...
that you just... I think that's what it like. It almost seems like it's one of those skills that is like natural to us in a way, it seems to people, and that we have almost been born with this natural ability to defend ourselves and like in a more animalistic way. Whereas, of course, it's really interesting actually to watch people who are, for example, people who, let's say, the gym bros or the more alpha male types, and they come in the gym and you see them really struggle on pads, struggle to throw punches, and you realize that there are levels to all of this. It's not something that comes naturally.
I think to build on what you've just said, Alex, is like I don't like to draw direct lines. Like the person, you could be a super smart genius, just a maths genius, right? And sit down with a grandmaster who's been playing for God knows how long. And you may not win, but you may be competitive because there's always an outlier to something, right? There's always an outlier to something.
Sure.
However, the fighting thing, you both use the word skill, right? There is skill in competitive fighting, 100%. But I don't think fighting is a skill. I think fighting is an innate capacity that we have a penchant for, right? Because you could be, who's a good example of this? You could be Artem Lobov, right? Who's not the most skilled fighter that you Jesus, don't. Like, you could be an Artem Lobov who gets into certain positions with certain promotions because he's unbelievably tough. Now, don't get me wrong, Artem Lobov versus any Donny you're going to find on the street, it's not close, right? It's nowhere near close. But in professional fighting, there's definitely skills involved. I think, however, people don't understand that professional fighting is professional fighting. It's winning a competition. It's not a blood sport. And what they do is they relate to what happens on a Friday night outside of a pub when some Donny's just got his head smashed in with a glass and now they're swinging at each other. It's not the same thing, right? Because how many times do you see head kicks and spinning back kicks and, elbows thrown in those fights? Not often is the answer, right? So there is a propensity for aggression that's innate to our human condition, and people relate that to professional fighting. That's where you become sticky. And we've all seen it, right? Me in both kickboxing and in Ju-Jitsu, and you guys in the MMA gyms that you've trained at, is you've seen some big fucker, some big unit comes in, and he walks in with his arms swinging by his ankles, and he says, I want to fight. Right? And this has happened on so many occasions at shoot fighters. Some guy comes in and our head coach was like, yeah, cool. And he chucks him in the ring with one of the kids and he gets fucking smashed, right?
That's right.
There's a difference between what people determine to be fighting and what professional fighting is, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with that. And I think we've often touched on this topic on our podcast,
of course,
where this is it, like professional fighting and let's say self-defense, for example, are totally different things and should be treated as such. Just because you know how to throw an elbow and a spinning kick doesn't make you great at self-defense
100%.
necessarily. But that being said, it surely increases your chances to some level.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean it's not unrelated. Like if you get in a fight with a Muay Thai aficionado, it's not going well.
No, absolutely not. And my point more is in support of both of you guys, and that's to say that there is an ether between what people determine fighting to be and professional fighting, right? And the skill gap is like an unbelievably sized chasm. Yeah. An unbelievably sized chasm, right? Yeah. And just to build on again what Alex has said is, in our kickboxing gym, right? Our coach used to say that the best way to win a fight is to run on the street. Right? And he was like, if conflict happens on the street, run is always your first option, right? Or walk away, essentially, right? But if that isn't an option, which a few times I'm sure for all of us in our lives hasn't been an option, or we haven't determined it to be an option, things get sticky for other people, right? And, again, I don't know about you guys, but in any situation that I get into on the street, one, I am incredibly fearful for myself and the other person, right? And maybe you guys can attest to this, but having trained for a number of years, the thing that scares me the most is what can the other guy do, right? What if I'm looking at an A-class Muay Thai K1 fighter that I've just never heard of before?
That's right.
And we're arguing, and at any time he could wheel kick me into Terry Etam oblivion.
I think my fear normally is not so much the skill aspect, because though they may be very well skilled, actually the people who train and are actually very good, they're actually very few and far between.
Yeah.
I think I saw somewhere that you're more likely to walk past like a murderer than a black belt in the street, something like that. I don't know if it's legit, but they made a good point in that skilled fighters are actually very few and far between. My fear is normally their mates behind me, someone has a rock or a knife. I think a lot more people are carrying knives than are...
In London especially, yeah.
Yeah, more people are carrying knives than are Muay Thai athletes, and even if they're not, I think my Ju-Jitsu will help me survive in an altercation. I'm not sure how much it's going to help me survive if they pick up a chair.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, this is the other side, right? And the other side of this coin is we are disillusioned in a way because we watch MMA fighters scrapping in a cage with rules and a referee and all of these various structures that support them. They're not getting hit with chairs very often, right? Do you know what I mean? I mean, look, I wouldn't put Nate Diaz past bringing a chair to an MMA fight. I really wouldn't put it past him. But there's also a polarity difference in if you got into an altercation with someone at a pub, it's literally anything goes, right?
Yeah, and I think, there are several fighters who I've heard talk about this. I think Frank Mir specifically, I remember, he says like, what's your preferred method of self-defense? And it's like a whatever caliber pistol and a knife or something. And he carries it around with him everywhere he goes. He's in an open carry state. And similar stories with boxers. I mean, they have guns in their houses. American boxers normally.
Sure.
How many British? But they're very well aware, at least, that stuff doesn't happen the same as it does in the ring.
And I think as well, the thing for professional fighters is there's a dominance hierarchy that is entirely unbalanced when it comes to these guys, right? Because we've all done it. We look at a fighter. I mean, I've done it. I shouldn't speak for you guys, but I've looked at Anderson Silva in his prime. I've looked at John Jones in his prime. I've looked at Demetrius Johnson in his prime. I've looked at Conor McGregor in his prime, and I've been like, fuck, I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I'm not the kind of person that would see Conor McGregor on the street and ask him to fight me because I don't have a death wish. Right? But there is almost certainly people that will go up to Conor and tell him, I could fuck you up. Right?
Yeah, I could have you.
Yeah, 100%. Right? There will be people that do that. Now, if you're Conor or John or whatever with a family and a wife and children, like, mate, if I was Frank Mir, I mean, Jesus, who fucks with Frank Mir? Like, who looks at Frank Mir as like, yeah, I could take that guy. Like,
even without the skills, yeah.
Even without the skills, right? But it makes sense to me that they just don't want to be pushed. They don't want to be tested. Do you know what I mean? Like, what for? But people,
that's it.
Yeah. What for?
That's it. That's what, and I think that's what Conor's always kind of professed, is that unless there are some stakes involved, what's the point, right? And rightly so, he carries a lot of guards with him, big boys, that keep that job away from him, having to sort of defend himself.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about like McGregor and the stakes involved, because how often do you hear it where a fighter says, there's always people who are like kicking off at press conferences and someone else will fight, I'm not going to fight you for no money, right? It's about, I think, like defining success, and it ties into what you said about your coach saying run away. Like, what's your success in a street fight? What do you gain from winning that fight? And a street fight is essentially what that is, like in a press conference where two people are kicking off. Like, what do you gain? You don't raise up the rankings, you don't get closer to your goals, you don't get the money, and you just get hurt. It directly impacts your ability to actually make a living, which at the end of the day, these fighters are making a living, and they're prize fighters. They prize.
Yeah,
I mean, I think for...
Just go.
Sorry, I would just say for McGregor, it would be the case of, he's trying to raise the profile of the fight, right? And that's why he does all that shit. And that's why during the fight, he would say, it's only business to Khabib.
Sometimes.
Getting fucked.
I don't know. I think, Conor is a man with a vast ego, an ego that none of us would understand, right? And it's necessary. It's necessary for him to be who he is, right? Like, look at all of the top guys. Anderson Silva, John Jones, Ronda Rousey, you name them, Chuck Liddell, Tito, any of these guys that broke barriers, Mighty Mouse. maybe Mike Masters the outlier, but they've all got incredible egos, right?
Yeah.
But you need that. Israel Adesanya is the new one, right? You need that to be that level. You need it. I think it's really necessary. Now, Conor part sells a fight, part plays mind games, part feeds his own ego. I think in that second round against Khabib, third round against Khabib, whenever it was, there's probably some of it was him telling the truth, right? Like, I was just saying the fight is just business. But part of him is essentially asking for mercy, right?
Yeah.
You know, and look, there's no. I'd be asking for mercy before I got in the cage of who we never got rid of. Do you know what I mean? Like, but I think there's a part of his ego that was telling him, like, you fucked up here. Like, you went too far this time, and now you're paying for it. And he was asking for mercy. And, you know, I don't think that anyone can berate him for that. That was one of the purest moments of that fight, I think, because you got to see some honesty amidst incredible chaos. But yeah, sorry, I've gone on a tangent.
No, so that's a really interesting take on it, and I can't really disagree with it. I think that's a pretty good point.
Because I imagine you guys have followed Conor as religiously as I have, but I remember Conor going out to Mjolnir in Iceland for the first couple of camps before he was in the UFC. And, you know, there was video of him sitting just outside the cage and there's steam rising off his body and he's just done some spars and whatever. And people ask him, like, why do you do this? And he was like, because this is all there is, right? This is me. This is who I am. I am insane for this sport. I'm obsessed with this sport. You know, that person is really who he is at his core. But the other side of him, the ego, has been fed by the money and the fame and the rhetoric and, you know, the notoriety and the mystic mark and this and that and the next thing. And I think what you look at in a moment like that against Khabib, it's all business. That's the Conor back in Reykjavik who just wants to fight, who just wants to compete, who just wants to show his skills on the biggest stage possible.
Yeah,
but it's just like
he has to love the sport. I mean, the thing is, you can't in just about not just fighting, not just things we have to sacrifice it, but things we have to grind, right? If we ever make it really big in the podcasting world, it's going to be because we love the podcasting. Because quite frankly, we are not getting, you know, we can get our own value out of these conversations, but we get no money. We do spend a lot of time. It does take a lot of effort. We like it intrinsically for what it is, you know, and the conversation's a part of that. I think of anything where you have to spend a lot of time at the bottom to become great, you have to love it. And McGregor has become great, and he did spend a lot of time with very little. He has to love fighting on some level, and not just for the money.
I mean, the only thing I will challenge on your point, which gets torn down by the Conor McGregor thing because he's always said he wants money and whatever, but is I don't think in order to become great, you should pursue greatness, right? Like with the podcast, for instance, let's use that as an example. I can't say I don't look at numbers and I don't look at this and I don't look at that, because I do. Of course I do. I try not to, but I do. I try not to read too much into the numbers, but I definitely look at numbers. Now, I think, you know, let's use your phrasing. If I ever make it really big in podcasting, it's because I love the podcast. I don't think you love the podcast. I think you love the conversation, right? Nobody loves a vast network dropout and timings are all over the place and you've got to edit it back and the video's not in sync and this and that and the next thing. Or like me, this week when I put the podcast up, I did all my edits. I did everything. The audio version went up. It went out to everyone. That was fine. I put the YouTube version up. Everything was fine. And then all of a sudden you just got no audio. And I'm like, why? The render was fine. Everything was fine. I put it up. No audio. Fuck you. So I then, you have to go and be public and apologize for it and take it down and re-render it and make sure the audio's in and put it back up on YouTube. And it's got a process and all that bullshit. Nobody fucking loves that stuff. But I think if you make it, quote unquote, whatever the fuck that means, right?
Yeah.
In anything, I think it's because you must. Like my point about the Conor thing is, I don't think he loves fighting. I think he loves training. Because he said this before, right? And you hear this from Donald Cerrone, you hear this from Georges St. Pierre,
GSP,
right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, GSP is probably the biggest one, right? That they hate fighting. They hate it. They love training. But it just so happens, in order for you to become a Conor McGregor-esque millionaire or a GSP-esque millionaire, you have to go in a cage and throw bones at someone until someone falls over.
Well, then maybe you better. And I know you said you don't like to draw comparisons, but I think this would be a good one in that case. The podcasting and the fighting is the same to the conversations and the training. Yes. I can do those things separately, but this is like a very good vehicle for me to, I don't know, it keeps me, it makes it, it's something about it, like just having the conversations is interesting, but it's quite hard actually to just message someone who I don't know, like yourself, to be like, hey, do you mind just taking an hour out of your day just to talk to me? Just
100%.
Just because.
I could not agree with you more. And this is essentially the reason why I started the podcast, is because of that thing. Like, let me ask you a question. Why is that? Why is it that you couldn't call Alex up on any random given day, or sorry, not Alex, me, message you on Instagram at any random given day and be like, yo, do you want to have a conversation for an hour? Why can't you do that?
I don't know. It's weird.
Right. But it's not weird.
We've lost it. We've lost that ability to just be able to do that. And I have to agree with you there. It's something that it's a bit different, I guess, in different cultures. I think so I'm Polish, as if you couldn't tell from my weird name. It's, for example, things like that are slightly different in Poland because culturally we're a bit more open than perhaps the English culture is in some respects, not everything. But it's getting lost in Poland too, and I think it's something that, as you said, like the age of text, the age of social media is probably in some part to blame.
100%.
Probably.
I won't derail this podcast with those thoughts, but I have some pretty, what I determine to be in-depth thoughts about where the human race is going with the introduction of tech. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I put the podcast together, is because, I messaged Robert Drysdale, right? ADCC champion, and was like, hello, would you be so kind as to maybe potentially, possibly, maybe one time come on my podcast? And he was like, yeah, sure. And I wasn't doing YouTube at the time, but I fucking wish I was, because this motherfucker, ADCC champion, joins the podcast shirtless in a hammock. All right, cool, bro. That's what we're doing? All right, cool, let's do that. And there are people that you wouldn't even imagine that you'd get to speak to, that you just, like, I'll name drop it, it's fine. Like, there's an author that I've followed for a little while called Donald McRae. Do you know who that guy is?
I'm afraid not.
So he's written like 12 books on like boxing and these kinds of things. He's Anthony Joshua's personal journalist for The Guardian at the moment, right? Like, he's a really cool guy, really interesting guy. And I've read his books and stuff, and I just emailed him and was like, fancy doing a podcast? And he emailed me back like almost instantly. He was like, yeah, sure, sounds interesting. And I'm like, Jesus, that's weird. But again, to your point, if I just saw that Donnie on the side of the street and I went up to him and was like, hello, please may I speak to you for an hour? He'd be like, I'm calling the police.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
That's true. And that's also weird.
It is weird.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
It is weird that just because it's a packaged thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
It's a podcast.
Yeah, it's safe.
And it makes it okay.
Yeah, it's safe.
You know what? There's another bit I've realised. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we're just all in our own heads about it. I mean, maybe not. Maybe you can't just get someone to talk to you for an hour. But all right. So, start of the podcast, when we originally did it was, to begin with, just us, just me and Alex. Then after a while, we started inviting, I don't know, our mates. And I was like, I want to get some big people on, but I don't know how to get big people on. Like, how do I do it? Like, what do I do? And I started writing for a magazine, and I was like, hi, do you want to come on to like I want to do something for the magazine, and it kind of gave me more of an excuse. And I talked to John.
Confidence, right?
Yeah, it gives you more confidence. And I realised after a while they don't have any fucking clue what magazine I'm writing for. Like I may not have even written for a magazine. Gary Tonin talks to me for like half an hour. Like he never saw that interview. He doesn't know who it is. I kind of realised after a while you can just message people unless they don't look at their messages and have like someone screening it for them. They're just someone who's going to pick up a phone and be like, sure.
Yeah, or not, right?
Or not. What's the worst that's going to happen? But for some reason, I felt completely incapable of messaging like anyone famous at the start.
Yeah, and I think to your point, right, and you make a really good point, and I was going to challenge you on it, but you've already done it, is you were like, oh, I was afraid of messaging big people. And I'm like, okay, but what does big mean? Like, what does it even mean to be a big person? Like, sure, if I messaged Joe Rogan's Instagram and was like, yo, fancy doing a podcast, the likelihood is he's never going to read that shit. But, everything is sort of in a hierarchy, right? And it's just an access hierarchy. What we determined to be an access hierarchy. Like, you guys felt confident enough to access me, right? You messaged me because, thank you very much, by the way, you listened to the podcast. I apologize for my dog.
That's actually awesome, to be honest.
Yeah, this is the first time he's ever been able to sleep through a podcast. Or the other times he just fucking whines, and I've got to put him away. But anyway, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. I also really enjoy your podcast. I probably should have said that at the very start. But you reached out to me, and we had a cordial conversation on Instagram, and you were like, I want to collaborate, and I'm like, sound, how do you want to do it? And then we're here, right? Whereas if I said to you, okay, now go and message John Danaher, right? You'd be like, oh, I don't know about that. But why? He's just a guy, right? And I think that you're entirely right. Entirely right.
Yeah, you're right. And the thing is, I think I'd be a lot less nervous now. I mean, part of it was you kind of like after you've done it once or twice, you kind of just like, oh, it's fine. Mm-hmm. And it's just, I mean, for my work, I have to talk to a lot of people. And at the start, but at the very start, I didn't want to pick up the phone. I didn't want to dial anyone. I'd have to be like, right, here's what you're going to say. All right, Get ready. Pick up the phone. Let's fucking go. Now I'm just like, blah, blah, blah. And I realized, and it's carried through to like the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And that now I think it's partly to do with that, and partly because I've just done it a couple of times. I feel more confident just messaging anyone for the podcast or for any reason. I can call people or anything. But there was nothing that was bad that was going to happen in any of those situations. It's all just a weird sort of pressure you put on yourself.
It's validation, isn't it?
Yeah. But the weird thing is, it's not even going to be socially embarrassing, because if John Danaher doesn't reply to my message, no one will know. And yet it's hard.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. There's something innate and intrinsic about the way that social media preys on our flaws and insecurities that aren't, well grooved. And I think that, I mean, let's not dive into that too much because we will seriously derail this podcast. But I think the moral of the story, right, is just fucking message who you want and see what happens in it. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely.
What's the worst that could happen?
Indeed. You wanted to touch on my MMA thoughts / MMA media thoughts, right?
Well, maybe I should explain why.
Okay.
We started the podcast because, to be honest, there are a few good podcasts out there that are a little bit more thoughtful, but quite frankly, most MMA podcasts are just shit talking about people. And just
the balance breakdown, ladies and gentlemen. There you go.
Yeah, you know what? No, I think the balance breakdown is different. I'll tell you, because the balance breakdown is you're actually trying to do something with that. You are actually trying to inform people about it. It's not just a hype show, and that's what I don't like. I don't like hype.
Fuck you, Sean McGuinness.
I don't like hype shows. I don't like meaningless content. And that's part of the reason. And the other reason is that people have a very wrong view of people who train mixed martial arts. People who train martial arts, you think they're sage and they've got some spiritual understanding. People who train mixed martial arts, you think they're thugs, and people think they're thugs and cage fighters. But I have had so many interesting conversations after training at the gym. I wanted and we wanted to create something where we actually talk about interesting stuff with interesting people within MMA. Like it feels like there's a whole raft of like information and knowledge and really interesting viewpoints that just people don't know about. All people know is people put on gloves and just brawl.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Like, I do think that's beautiful. I mean, okay, fine. I'll go about my answer in a couple of different ways. The first one is, I think you're absolutely right. And I think the framing of that is important. I think there is a common misconception about what MMA is. And to be honest, a lot of that is MMA's fault. Like, a lot of that is MMA's fault. If you're like, oh, there's this really cool feud or rivalry between Conor and Nate and they're fucking chucking monster cans across an auditorium at each other, or you do Conor and the Bus, or you do Nick and Nate and Gilbert Melendez fucking brawling in a cage, or you name it, right? You name it. There is some form of extracurricular feud embroiled into MMA somewhere, right? Or if we're going to go really down the rabbit hole, political figures that are driving various parts of MMA or whatever. And again, let's not go too deep into that. But MMA is at its core a dirty fucking sport, right? Outside of the martial arts concept of it, the business of MMA is a dirty fucking sport. And people see that and they also connect with that. That's what they like, right? They like that it's rebellious, that it's quote unquote naughty, right? That it's against the norm. And when you go and when you can be embroiled in a Conor Habib, which essentially divided the world in a sense, right? East and West and likewise. People love that. It's sexy. It's also awful, right? Which people love to see as well. So, MMA has a misconception, and the three of us can sit here and we can righteously stand our ground. But we also have to be realistic about what the popularization of MMA is. And the one thing I will say is, firstly, keep up the good work, right? Because what you're doing is really important. And I think the other podcast I will give a shout out to is Severe MMA, the Severe MMA podcast. Do you guys listen to that?
I don't, but I will.
So you absolutely should. So that's run by a guy called Sean Sheehan and a guy called Graham McDonald. And both of those guys are Irish MMA OGs. They were, trailing around MMA in Ireland way before the Conor McGregor era. And they've been following the sport and covering the sport. And Sean Sheehan is probably one of the best analysts in Europe and definitely one of the best pillars for judging beside Ben Cartledge. So definitely go and check out those guys. But specifically for you guys, like, there's something that's really organic and interesting about the way that you run your podcast. And I think the three of you have got a really nice, Jesus, I'm failing at English. What's the word I'm looking for?
Dynamic.
Thank you. That'll do. There's a really nice dynamic between the three of you. The three of you are obviously intelligent, right? And you're well informed, and the three of you have obviously trained before, which is really something beautiful. Like, I don't like where, as you said, there's sort of empty content. It's like, what's it content? Do you know what I mean? Like a what's it is literally just an empty fucking crisp. No shame about what's it. No shame. But there's what's it podcasts, right, which is just cheese. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just cheese. It's not even cheese. It's cheese flavor. Do you know what I mean? It's just bullshit. But actually, the podcast you put out the other day about PEDs in sport, like, that was absolutely brilliant. I really, really enjoyed that one. I think it's important to have people that put out content that furthers the sport in some fashion.
I mean, I definitely have to say I appreciate those kind words. That's really nice of you to say. I would add to that although we have spoken about, having bigger names on and all those things, I also, in a way, feel like having people who are a bit less known makes it also quite interesting.
I agree.
And I think I quite like the fact that we get to speak to people who aren't the Conor McGregors or aren't the John Danahers. and we
Yeah,
go, Robbie.
I mean, we're not here to get big names on, because I think actually, yeah, maybe you're right about the what you said earlier about we like the conversations, not the podcast itself. It kind of ties into that, because we want to get people on who are interesting to talk to. And you know, to be honest, I expect there are a lot of fighters who are interesting we don't know about, but getting Conor McGregor on it would grow the podcast massively, and I don't really know if we'd get a lot of meaningful content. There are big names who I'd like to get on. Ryan Hall, for example. I think would be
bucket list.
Yeah, be fascinating to talk to. But actually, the guy who I want to get on most at the moment, he's not well known. I feel really bad. I've already forgotten his name. Like, we just messaged him a few times on Instagram. He was struggling to get Zoom to work, to be honest.
Yeah.
And what he's done is he's been fucked over by promoters. He's fought a lot of very well-known people. He's got a very mixed record, and he's never made it that big. But he's the guy I want to speak to the most. Like, yeah, you're right about the.
Or what about the first British woman in the UFC? Right,
Rosie Sexton. I've had her on the podcast.
Yes, you saw. Yeah.
Like, to speak to someone like that, to me, it would be fucking incredible, because she fucking did maths at Cambridge and did a PhD in computer science, for fuck's sake. Like, that is insane. Like, so me and Robbie both went to uni. I'm an engineering grad. I actually work as an engineer. So to hear someone like that who was like going the intellectual way and still fucking fought in the UFC, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think, again, you know, I don't want to delve too deep, but with Rosie especially, like, that was incredible. Like, I spoke to Dan Strauss. I've actually worked with Dan Strauss. You guys heard of Pantheon Promotions?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm one of the directors of Pantheon Promotions. So Dan Strauss has commentated for us a couple of times. So I saw that Dan Strauss had Rosie on. I messaged Dan and I was like, how do I get in touch with you? He was like, just fucking tweet her, mate. So I did, and she got back to me, and that conversation was electrifying, right? Like, I feel like she had so much more to give, and that's not a criticism. It's just there is universes upon universes in that lady's brain that that in 2.5 hours you're just not even able to navigate the first one. There's so much. Like, think about it. As you say, so she's got 2 PhDs, right? She's a politician, like an elected politician. She's the first female MMA fighter in the UFC, fighting Ioana Jędrzejczyk, fighting a litany of great fighters. She fought Gina Carano as well, which is like OG shit.
Oh shit.
Yeah, I mean, she got stopped by Gina Carano, but it is what it is. Like, she's also an incredible intellectual. Like, regardless of the PhDs, she's also incredibly proficient at like 4 different instruments to like classical level. She's unbelievable. The woman has lived like 5 lives in the time that, I don't know how old she is, but in the time that she's lived 5 people's lives. And to your point about getting big names on, I just want to say one thing. Like I've spoken off air to some, and on air to us, but to some people who you'd quote to be like a big name in Jiu-Jitsu, for instance, or MMA or whatever. The problem with some of those guys is when you're that driven, it's literally your life. So when you ask a question like, oh, what do you think about the recent political election? Don't know, was training.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you can only talk very specific details of what they do. Right. And it doesn't really stretch beyond that. It's very true. Yeah.
And because think about it, if you're I don't know, let's think about this. If you're a Peter Yan, right? If you're a Piotr Yan, and what are you doing, right? You're being a father, that's the first thing. And then you're training day in, day out. Because you've got Aljamain Sterling coming at your fucking neck sooner rather than later. You had Jose Aldo coming at your neck 6 months ago. Yeah. You can't be doing up fucking Twitter arguments and Trump and Biden and all this bullshit. No. You've got some kid from the Brazilian favelas who wants to come and kick your fucking chin off. There's no time, right? There's just no time. So when you speak to these people, the thing that I found specifically is I was shocked initially that these people didn't have deeper or introspective thoughts. And I'm sure they do have, right? Really, at the back of their brain, I'm sure they do have, but they're just consumed with a goal, whatever that thing is. So to your point, Rob, is like, sometimes it's better to get people that they've got a bit of seasoning on them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it as a podcast topic, like something along the lines of like, what do you lose by being so great? And because you do have to be obsessed, right? You have to be obsessed with something. Right. So maybe I'll just put that one down. I mean, I was trying to think of how to sort of phrase it properly that will get the conversation.
No, that's perfect.
Yeah, maybe what do you have to lose to be so great? And it's the fact that you have to be so obsessed and so one-track minded. And I think you do see it a lot. I mean, I know that career is not a good way to necessarily judge how fulfilling someone's life is, but how many fighters do you see finish a career and they can't do anything but fight?
Yeah.
Because they've been
essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on. Yeah.
Sorry, I think maybe the newer crop of fighters, that's not quite the same thing. But I'm gonna draw a sort of a line, and that line is Donald Cerrone and previous. Right. So if you look at Donald Cerrone, or you look at a Diego Sanchez, or you look at a Matt Brown, or Joe Lozon, or these kinds of fighters, that era of fighters, and previously, literally all they knew was fighting. All they knew was fighting. Right. When an Israel Adesanya hangs his gloves up, or when a Conor McGregor hangs his gloves up, or maybe not Conor because he's fucking wild, but when the new era, I think they understand that this game is there to be played. Yeah. It's not there to be lived.
Indeed. You see it already in people. You're right, because the new age, for example, someone that I follow because I like him is Sean O'Malley.
Sure.
Sure. And he has his podcast. He's already doing quite well with that. I'm sure he earns quite a decent bit of money off the podcast itself. So these people are already, if they're a bit more knowledgeable about financials and making money, brands, whatever. Yeah, you're right. They know it's not just about that, and that there's only a very short, specific time period. And I guess this might actually feed into Dana White's point, which is that fighting is not a career, which is, it's a fucking shit thing to say when you're a president of the UFC. But annoyingly, and I think I've disagreed with it in the past, there is some truth to it. It is because it's a short-lived thing. It's an opportunity that lasts 15 to 20 years,
if that,
of your life.
I think,
unless yeah, go ahead.
I think most professional fighters last a lot less than that. I think most professional fighters are more like 5, 7 years.
Yeah. So, there's been a plethora of conversations about that actually, where it's like, when's the prime of your fighting career from a financial perspective? Because if everyone was just up and was just making money from whenever, then perfect. But hold on, my dog wants to get off the sofa. Give me a second.
I'm sorry, I was smiling because I saw him and he looks so cute.
Let me just pause this. Hold on.
It's so distracting.
Hey boy,
I was just laughing. I was like, I'm not going to keep a straight face.
There you go, my boy.
That place. Look at it.
Dude, it's so fucking sick. I love that painting or whatever it is on the right.
Yeah.
It's really cool. And also, I think that's like Conor McGregor there.
Yeah, so my dog's just pissed on the sofa. These things happen.
Oh, no. Is he a pup?
Yeah, he's 9 weeks, right? So he's super new, super young. Look at it.
Yeah.
No, he's gonna be with his mother now. So, yeah, sorry, that's completely derailed that. I apologise for the unnecessary edit that's going to have to happen to this podcast because of that.
That's all right, dude.
Yeah, sorry, you were saying about MMA is not a career. I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. At the end of the day, if everyone was at a level where, Jesus, fighter pay is another conversation that should probably be had more often than it is right now, right?
Yeah.
And if you ever do a fighter pay conversation, please drag me in. But
we already did it, but let's do another
let's do
one.
it again. Yeah. It's like if you weren't making 10 and 10 by the time you get to the pinnacle of your career, which is entering the UFC, right, then a lot more fighters would be a lot better off in terms of when they come out of their career. Like you think about Tyron Woodley, I think is the perfect example of this. He wins the belt, right? And then his style changes almost immediately to become ultra defensive. Why? Because he can't lose that belt. If he loses that belt, like, did you see what his purse was for when he lost the title to Usman for when he fought Colby Covington? Did you see the difference?
No, I didn't.
So he fights Usman and he earns 600K, right? He fights Colby and he's on 100 and 100.
Whoa.
Think about that.
Has a lot of value loss.
Even if he wins, right, he's on a third of what he was on. And obviously, with the title, he's got pay-per-view points as well. Right? So that 600K is not 600K. It's a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
We brought that up. But that's more security with a champion. We'll just make better fights.
And we're only talking as well about the value of the pay-per-view and all these things, but what about sponsorships? What about all these things if you're a champion, your profile raises massively. And for example, me being Polish and loving Jan Błachowicz,
of course,
for him now,
Polish
he's
power.
the god of Poland right now.
He is.
And if when he loses that belt, which I'm sure he will at some point, if not the next fight, for Jan, I wish him well. But it's not gonna be as easy. And you see it with Joanna now, for example, in Poland, where she was right at the top there in Poland. You know, as I watch Polish media and all these things. And now she's not really part of the conversation so much.
I mean, Jesus. Like there's so much that I want to say, but I also, whatever.
Derailed it.
Yeah, we have definitely derailed it. But I think with this particular topic, with the fighter pay topic and everything else, it's like who was it? There was a fighter that I saw the other day. I can't remember who it was, but it was a big name, right? And they were on like 60 and 60, and I nearly fell off my chair. I could not believe it. But think about that, right? In a way, it's similar to football, right? Like what I was saying is about drawing comparisons. Like I don't mind drawing comparisons, but I hate drawing absolute comparisons, right? I hate drawing absolute lines in anything. But the footballer thing, if you're really good, right, and you play for a Premier League team, a top 10 Premier League team, you're probably making upwards of 30K a week, right? Which is obviously incredible money. But you're making that for 6 years, 10 years, maybe if you're really lucky, 10 years, right? So that is your entire life's work, essentially, in 10 years. Your earning potential in 10 years. Now, don't get me wrong, that's still an egregious amount of money, 30K a week for 10 years, sign me up, cheers. But if you're an MMA fighter, that's an even shorter window with even more severe repercussions for your health in the long term. And you may end up with coming out with nothing, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. Actually, it's interesting. I'm going to derail it.
Let's do it. Let's go. Come on.
This. But it's interesting that you say more health issues with regards to the comparison between MMA and football, because I remember not even that long ago people having conversations that MMA is the safest sport out there. I really do remember these conversations of top people in MMA. And I think since we've been understanding, and this is really in the last 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, not that much longer, we've been understanding the CTE problem. I think that picture's changing a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, look, I mean, I can tell you I've had concussions from kickboxing. Like one which was really bad was I was knocked out by my own coach. We were sparring on a wooden floor, and he kicked me in the head and dropped me, and my head bounced. I mean, I don't remember it bouncing, obviously, but my head. I was told my head bounced off that wooden floor, and I'm like 15 years old, right? 14 years old, like. And I tell you, I see problems now. I have memory problems now, not crazy memory problems, but my missus was going to get a tattoo yesterday, right? She was like, "Oh, I'm going out," and I was like, "Where are you going?" She's like, "I'm getting a tattoo. I told you like 4 times in the last week." Doesn't register in my brain. Doesn't exist. It's not there.
Yeah,
right?
We really don't know.
We don't know. Of course, we don't know.
Yeah,
and I think one of the things that brought it to light drastically was not. It wasn't MMA, right? It's NFL. It's Anthony Hernandez. Have you seen that documentary?
I've not.
I've heard about it, and but I haven't seen
Anthony
it.
Hernandez is essentially a boy wonder, right? Incredible NFL athlete. He ended up murdering his best friends, and when he then committed suicide in prison, and when they opened his head up, he was riddled with CTE, right? Riddled with it. Now, and then essentially the ethical question that podcast posed was it really him or was it the CTE? Right now, I'm in no fucking place to answer that question, right? But I take it you guys have heard about the stuff with Matt. Jesus, who's the guy who got hit by a train?
Oh,
he fought GSP. How do I not know this guy? Matt. Oh my God.
Matt Hughes.
Thank you. Oh my God, Matt Hughes. Yeah, I know we've got less than a minute, so I'll keep this quick. But like Matt Hughes has now been caught with like domestic violence and beating up animals and all this sort of stuff. Like that's not the Matt Hughes that we were aware of when he was in the UFC. Like that's just not the case. Now, does CT have a role to play in that? Maybe, right? What we know about CT in its infancy is that it gives people uncontrollable violent tendencies. Well, if that's the case, shit, like, what do we do now?
I mean, we can't. I think the way we need to go is to make sure that people understand the risks, which needs research. Like we haven't got enough research into it at the moment. That's the trouble. I think if you understand the risks and you know what you're doing, then I think people can make an informed choice and make the decision they want. I think the trouble is that if you're presented a choice and you don't know what's in either box, what is the choice really? That's the trouble. If you get given 2 boxes, you don't know what's in either box, you're just going to pick one. You don't know. And if my boxes are money, you're living, and I don't know, there might be some health effects or less health effects, but you can't make a living and you don't know how else, you're probably going to take the one with the money. There may be CT in that box, but unless we do research into it, unless you can make an informed decision, it's not really a decision.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, CTE is prevalent. Concussions are prevalent in almost any contact sport, whether it be, boxing, wrestling, Ju-Jitsu, anything really, rugby, NFL, any of that shit. Football, there's players that have got severe concussions from heading the football too hard. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, and you can get a concussion from not taking a headshot, right? You can get hit so hard in the body that you get a concussion.
Yeah.
It's just...
Yeah, and I mean, I think ultimately, you then also have to go down deep and ask the question of what am I willing to risk to live a good life, to live a fulfilling life? And I think for me, for example, that answer is I need martial arts in my life because I just love them. And that if it means, I mean, of course, fighting in the ring is a different story when I'm really not, getting paid or getting some form of benefit from it financially. It's maybe a different question. But at the same time, do I live in fear for the rest of my life and not do things that I find enjoyable? Or do I do them? And you really have to ask that question deeper within yourself, and it's more of a philosophical question almost.
Yeah, well, I think that's it. You can't be afraid of making choices, but the thing is, if Matt Hughes doesn't know that he's going to get CTE, then well, people have to know. People have to know, and if Matt Hughes doesn't know that he's going to get CTE, then it's very unfortunate. If you know that it might happen and you still go ahead and make those choices, then at the end of the day, you may only have yourself to blame in some ways.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Well, that's kind of ended it on a dark note now, but we'll round it off there. And was there anything else you wanted to talk about while you're on the podcast?
No, I mean, look, all I'll say is just thank you for reaching out, right? Like I listened to the podcast a few times and it was really good. I really enjoy it. I know this is probably really hypocritical, but I don't actually find the time to listen to too many podcasts myself. Now I listened to the PED one because I saw it and I was like, ooh, I like this topic, I'll listen to it. But I think as well, I do quite a few things in quite a few different areas, and I have to regiment my time quite strictly in order to get everything done. And when I do listen to a podcast, it's kind of a treat. Do you know what I mean? Because bearing in mind, I have to listen to my own at least twice. One when I do it and then one when I edit it. So, there's only so much of podcasting that I can actually physically put my brain through. But, I love the idea of collaboration between podcasts, especially podcasts that aren't Joe Rogan. And I'm very grateful to you guys for reaching out. And I'm really excited to have you on the Balance Breakdown or the All About Balance podcast, whichever one you fancy doing. And yeah, look, it was a privilege to speak to you guys. And the one thing that I would say is please just keep doing what you're doing, because there's only, I think the thing that people gravitate the most to is organic content, right? Thing that's not manufactured, things that's not scripted and none of that, and this is certainly not that, right? You're just three. The thing that's beautiful about this podcast and the thing that resonated with me instantly is it's just three lads having a conversation about shit they enjoy. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
We hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please consider subscribing to the podcast and checking us out on YouTube, Facebook and Instagram under the name Combat Thoughts. We'll see you next time.